This is our detour video from our children's book, Punk, A World of Voices. Going over our agenda, I will be going over 3 different topics: the globalization of punk music and culture, some of the different punk scenes and distinct aspects of them, and lastly, the significance of de-identification. When looking at the globalization of punk music and culture, we see that many punk movements have emerged globally, each with the goal of speaking out against injustice, taking agency for self-expression and identity, and building a community. Let's look at some of those movements. First, we begin with how those in the United Kingdom wanted to take control and defy against the social norms of fashion and aesthetics. At this time in the 1960s, we also see how citizens spoke out against the form of monarchical power of the royal family, even until modern times, which people are asking for better living and working conditions and wages. Here, a 60s banner is shown about how many individuals felt about Parliament government control and their decisions about going to war and wanting peace. Also pictured are the later aesthetic trends of punk culture throughout the 80s and 90s, although those can still be seen today in modern times. Next, we look at the social movements in New York throughout the 60s and 70s, with major demands for equal education in response to the racist Jim Crow segregation laws. In this career field, it has been historically a low-paying career for the amount of work that is put in to educating the nation's children, the next generation. Along the lines of the times, many protested against white supremacy ideals of racist laws and oppression. Claims of abolishing capitalism and the top 1% of the rich have also been popular for many decades. Thus, it leads into how we can observe that regional social contexts of movements and culture are important to how punk culture and music can be expressed and distributed. One of the most popular ways in which this was done was listening to music and taking part in the community through punk shows at underground venues. Regardless of the resources people may or may not have access to, the DIY or do-it-yourself attitude and individualization made it possible when society held tight to their conventions and norms. Many people produced and distributed their own publications of punk ideas and information about shows called zines. Music records and tapes were also self-produced and shared by hand before the times of the internet. Besides these, bringing punk to the masses may involve inserting oneself into the mainstream, such as this event, when a band performed their unconventional and at the time unpopular to the mainstream music at a well-renowned late-night television show. We can also see how bands such as the Bags utilize costumes and physical aesthetics to negate and defy from societal standards. Next, we look at the various punk scenes over time. Punk began in the 1960s in America as a no to hippie culture. It aimed to sever the ties to hippie aesthetics of the times. This looks like bright colors, loose clothing, and long hair. Although punk looks were inspired by the past trends of bikers and greasers from the 1950s. We can also focus on the indicative punk hairstyles as a key to showing one's rebellion against the mainstream, and also represented a way of claiming one's freedom against expectations. Immigration and segregation fueled Mexican Americans to create a community where they could be heard and seen. Shows put on by Chicanx bands were a major precursor to the car meets popular in California today, as their shows were set up as drive-ins. And many bands integrated their roots into their music, with members singing in Spanish and using Latin musicality and instrumentation. The influence of Black artistry, musicianship, and culture also is not praised enough or mentioned enough. The UK band The Clash drew major inspiration from music genres such as blues, reggae, and ska. They quote American blues guitarist Bo Diddley as important to shaping their music. Also, living in neighborhoods with large populations of Afro-Caribbean residents made their impact with the reggae music that would be streamed and beloved throughout the area. Lastly, with many punk bands in close connection to hip-hop, the early group Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five historically opened for The Clash at several of their shows. Now looking at the grunge scene from the Pacific Northwest in the 90s, we observe Nirvana's impact on music and culture as a whole. Although not uncommon to their band, many bands would frequently recombine members, which is what contributed to the rich context of the region's newer underground sound. Nirvana's lyricism also opened up conversation about mental health, specifically for men's internal struggles. They also pioneered speaking out against sexual violence through their music, seen in their songs from their album In Utero, with a nod to the notion of birth and woman. Lastly, we look at de-identification. This can be denoted as the ways in which individuals take control and agency over their identities, and how society may define them through their limited experiences and even stereotypes and prejudices. People de-identify by creating their own image through all different art forms and presentations. By breaking down the conventions of gender, culture, religion, and so on, they do not let society define and choose who they can be. This was the major goal of punk ideals and ideas. Now, what does punk mean today? It's safe to say that individuals in this generation are not as afraid to speak up, to dress how they want, to produce what they want. The ideas that the beginnings of punk has set forth cannot be more important than they are today. Even with the quote-unquote progress that has been made throughout the past decades, it matters to have freedom. And in this country, we are lucky to have the right to safely and freely do so. In these times that can seem outright aggressive, we can celebrate being queer at pride parades and openly be who we are. We can speak out against government control of women's bodies in support of reproductive justice. We can publicly make claims against those who have physically, emotionally, and mentally harmed us. We can march the streets to claim justice for those who are victims to institutional and systemic racism and injustice. We can protest against the societal conventions of what is binary, black and white, and woman and man, and we can take hold of our future. And to me, that is why punk expression holds its significance today.